In the hazy corridors of history, a universal question has echoed through the consciousness of humanity, regardless of belief systems. Who, truly, were the prophets whose names adorn sacred texts and whose stories we grew up with? These figures, the emissaries whose tales have shaped the spiritual fabric of civilizations, are said to have been sent to humanity in the tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands, according to some traditions. This deep familiarity, however, is juxtaposed with a colossal enigma. If these divine messengers truly existed in such vast numbers, why is there a near absolute void of physical evidence to support their existence? Where are their tombs, the archaeological layers of the cities they lived in, the tangible relics they left behind? This investigation embarks on an intellectual journey beyond dogma, seeking to explore the potential truths behind this mysterious silence, venturing into the deepest and most enigmatic layers of history. The greatest challenge to the narrative of the prophets in the modern era is the almost complete absence of tangible, verifiable evidence. The fact that the Prophet Muhammad is the only prophet whose existence, era, and burial place are multidimensionally confirmed by both his followers and contemporary non-follower sources turns the status of all other prophets into a massive anomaly. This is not merely a matter of curiosity, but a methodologically established fact underscored by modern history and archaeology. Leading scholars have demonstrated the profound depth of this evidentiary gap. For instance, Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman, in their groundbreaking work, The Bible Unearthed, argue that there is no archaeological evidence for the glorious kingdoms of David and Solomon, as described in the Torah, with their gold-plated palaces and vast armies. Instead, the archaeology of the period suggests Jerusalem was a modest hill country town centered around a small fortress. Similarly, there is no trace in Egypt's meticulous bureaucratic records or in the extensive archaeological surveys of the Sinai Peninsula of a mass Israelite exodus involving hundreds of thousands of people wandering for 40 years. Religious historian Bart Ehrman points out that no contemporary Roman or Jewish writers of Jesus' time mention the grand miracles he is said to have performed, like raising the dead or turning water into wine, nor his sermons that captivated thousands on mountaintops. Even the earliest Christian texts, the Gospels, were written decades after the events, not by eyewitnesses, but by Greek-speaking authors, unfamiliar with the Palestinian geography, based on oral traditions passed down through generations. Historians like John Dominic Crossan assert that this deep chasm between archaeology and oral tradition eventually led to legends and theological interpretations, replacing historical facts. This predicament applies not only to major figures like Jesus, Moses, or David, but to the thousands of other prophets mentioned in the narratives. The primary source for these narratives outside the Quran is the Israelite corpus, the Torah, Talmud, and other Jewish texts, which were generally written centuries after the events they describe, with specific theological and political objectives. Their purpose was not to keep an objective historical record, but to legitimize the identity, faith, and special covenant relationship of a nation with God. Therefore, it is not surprising that there is not a single line about a figure like Abraham in the archives of the meticulous record-keeping civilizations of his supposed era, such as the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, or Egyptians. In fact, the clay tablets and papyri of these civilizations detail the dominance of complex and rich polytheistic systems in the region at that time. Even the concept of Elohim, God, in the Torah has been linguistically and archaeologically traced back to El, the head of the Canaanite pantheon, and his divine family, his consort Asherah, and their children. This data clearly shows that the prophet stories, as they have been transmitted to us, do not rest on a historical foundation, leading us to a critical crossroads. Either these stories are purely fictional allegories created to convey a moral message, or the time and place to which they belong are entirely different from what we have been told. This historical impasse forces us to take a step back and look more closely at the word prophet itself and its original meaning. The etymological roots of the word: Persian, bringer of news; Hebrew, nabi; Greek, prophetess, carry a much broader, more layered and deeper meaning than the modern, ingrained definition of a sacred messenger receiving direct revelation from God. These words fundamentally mean one who brings information and news from the ancients, from a primordial source. The Greek word prophetess in particular comes from the roots pro, before or on behalf of, and phetes, to speak, and in addition to foretell, prophecy. It also, and more importantly, means to speak on behalf of someone, or to transmit prior knowledge. From this broader perspective, the mission of prophecy can be seen not just as a divine contact, but as the preservation and transmission of a lost wisdom. This is the transmission of what Aldous Huxley called the Philosophia Perennis, perennial philosophy, the universal truth that lies at the core of all religions and mystical traditions. Within this framework, many great figures in history can be included in this category. For example, the Greek philosopher Plato, who argued for the existence of an absolute reality beyond the visible world with his theory of forms, and taught the immortality of the soul; the revolutionary pharaoh Akhenaten, who dismantled Egypt's millennia-old and corrupt polytheistic system to introduce the belief in a single universal god; Aten, whose famous great hymn to the Aten contains phrases strikingly similar to the Psalms of the Torah; the sage Apollonius of Tyana, who was said to have traveled to India, learned the wisdom of the Brahmins, healed the sick, and performed miracles, and whose biography was written by Philostratus as a rival to the Gospels; or the wise Sumerian king Enmerkar, who communicated directly with his gods to guide his people. Although these individuals did not call themselves prophets, they were scholars, leaders, and thinkers who carried the teachings, philosophy, moral values, and even scientific knowledge of a forgotten past into their own eras. This interpretation provides a highly plausible explanation for the questions: why were there so many prophets? And why were they spread across different geographies of the world? They were not confined to a single geography or religion, but were links in a global chain of wisdom, disseminating universal knowledge. Their legacy lives not in stone monuments decaying underground, but in the ideas they transmitted, which shaped civilizations and elevated human consciousness. If the prophets were the carriers of an ancient wisdom, what was the source of this wisdom? Perhaps the true time frame of these lost prophets and their incredible stories lies beyond our known history, in a lost golden age that is said to have ended abruptly with the Great Flood around 12,000 years ago. The clues to this radical question may lie encrypted in one of humanity's oldest written documents, the Sumerian King List. This list clearly divides history into two eras: before the flood and after the flood. The most astonishing and most ignored aspect of the list by modern history is its assertion that the pre-flood kings reigned for tens of thousands of years. For example, the first king on the list, Alulim, identified by many researchers with Adam, reigned for 28,800 years, and another for 36,000 years. After the flood, human lifespans and reigns are seen to have dramatically shortened to mere decades. While mainstream history dismisses these incredible numbers as symbolic or mythological exaggeration, these narratives align perfectly with Golden Age myths from all over the world, such as Plato's Atlantis, Hinduism's Satya Yuga, Egypt's Zep Tepi, or First Time, and Hesiod's ages of gold, silver, and bronze. These myths, without exception, point to the existence of a civilization before the flood that possessed advanced technology, profound cosmic wisdom, a different biology, and very long lifespans. This perspective allows us to interpret the prophetic narratives in an entirely different light and brings to mind Arthur C. Clarke's famous law: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Perhaps the stories of prophets like Abraham, Moses, or Solomon are, in fact, the mythologized, distorted, and reinterpreted reflections of the memories of a pre-flood era in the consciousness of post-flood primitive humanity. The flying throne of Prophet Solomon that commanded the winds might be the memory of an advanced aircraft, of a manna, from a lost civilization. His ability to speak with animals might be the folkloric description of a technology that communicated through consciousness or frequencies. Parting of the Red Sea by Moses might be the memory of a massive geoengineering project powered by a forgotten energy source, or a form of sonic technology which over time transformed into a divine miracle. The deadly power of the Ark of the Covenant might be the misunderstanding of a portable power source or a weapon system. In this case, the reason we cannot find traces of the prophets and their monumental deeds in our current history is that we are looking in the completely wrong time period and with the wrong technological expectations. Their stories belong to a technologically advanced past, far older than the agricultural societies we know. According to this theory, the flood was not just a natural disaster, but also the Great Forgetting, an event that reset a civilization and wiped humanity's collective memory. The surviving, primitive humanity after the flood, in time, deified the advanced, long-lived, and technologically superior rulers of the Old World, the lords or gods, thus laying the foundations for polytheistic religions. In the midst of this confusion, the carriers of knowledge, later known as prophets, tried to revive the forgotten belief in a single absolute creator, the knowledge of universal unity and cosmic order. Their real struggle was to separate the message, the one creator, from the messenger, the rulers of the old world, and to save humanity from idolatry, which is the worship of beings more advanced than oneself. This is why a pre-flood figure like Enoch was transformed into the god of wisdom Thoth in Egypt, the messenger of the gods Hermes Trismegistus in Greece, and the prophet Idris in Islam, echoing through different cultures. They were the ones who transmitted the knowledge of the lost civilization through symbols, the triangle, the eye, the serpent, myths, sacred geometry, and stories. This chain of wisdom was never completely broken. In oppressive times when it could not be transmitted openly, it continued to flow, like an underground river through Hermetic traditions, Gnostic schools, Pythagorean brotherhoods, secret societies, and esoteric teachings. This underground river later became one of the most important sparks that ignited the Renaissance, which brought Europe out of the Dark Ages and the subsequent scientific revolution. Newton's alchemical studies, Kepler's planetary harmonies, Da Vinci's sacred proportions are all evidence of the profound influence of this ancient wisdom on the birth of modern science. Today, this mission of carrying knowledge is continued by boundary-pushing scientists trying to solve the secrets of the universe, profound philosophers questioning the meaning of existence, artists reflecting universal truths in their works, and spiritual guides. The legacy of the past is hidden not only in divine texts, but also in the ancient observations and knowledge that form the basis of science, in the sacred ratios of architecture, and in the universal symbolic language of mythology. Structures like Göbekli Tepe, which upend the known historical paradigm, are tangible proof that this lost past is slowly re-emerging, and that history is ready to be rewritten. In conclusion, the answer to the question, where are the prophets, may not be found by digging in the ground, but by delving into the depths of humanity's collective memory, by reading myths, symbols, and ancient texts with new eyes and an interdisciplinary approach. This is not just a historical investigation, but a journey to understand who we are, where we come from, and what our place in the universe is. To correctly read and understand this legacy, and to unite in its light, may be the only way for humanity to avoid a recurring catastrophe, and to fully realize its potential to create its own golden age.